The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was always mindful of the small creatures and animals which live upon the earth. These small creatures are all God's creatures and must be treated with kindness and care. The Prophet always taught that this was so, and that it was a duty of all Muslims to observe this rule. You will be rewarded by Allah for your acts of kindness towards living creatures, the Prophet said. Allah wants man to look after animals. Plants and trees need care and respect too. Even looking after plants and trees is an act of virtue, said the Prophet. For a Muslim, he said, it is an act of charity to plant a tree or till a land where birds or men or animals come and eat of its fruits. May Allah bless his Prophet and shower peace upon him. He came to this world as a blessing for people and animals and all creatures that live on the earth. The Prophet told his friends and companions many stories about kindness to animals. He told them how Allah rewards such kindness but punishes cruelty. We shall relate some of the stories the Prophet told about the ways we can be kind to animals and care for them as Allah has commanded.
Our first story is called The Little Ants.
The Prophet and his companions once paused during a journey and made a camp where they could rest. The Prophet went round the camp, talking to the men and making sure that everything was all right. Then, not far away, he saw a fire. Someone had lit the fire to keep himself warm. The Prophet walked over towards the man who had lit the fire to talk to him. Suddenly, he saw not far away there was an ant hill. The ants could be seen running about near the hill, working very hard as ants do. Some of the ants were further away from the anthill than the others, and the Prophet saw that they were getting very close to the fire which the man had lit. If they came much closer, they might be burnt up or harmed in some way. The Prophet was very disturbed to see this. The ants were in danger. That meant that God's living creatures were in danger. "Who has made this fire?" he asked. The man who had made the fire looked up. "I made the fire, O Messenger of Allah," he replied. "It is cold, and I wanted to make myself warm." "Quick," the Prophet told him, "put out the fire! Put out the fire!" The man obeyed at once. He took a blanket and beat the fire until the flames died away. Then the man looked round and saw that there were ants near to where the fire had been. He realized then that the Prophet had been worried about the ants. He did not want the fire to hurt them, and in his great mercy he had ordered the fire to be put out. Ever afterwards, the man would always remember to look round carefully before he made a fire. There could be ants or other animals nearby, he would say to himself, and Allah forbids that any man should hurt them.
The second story is about a thirsty man and a thirsty dog.
One day, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, told his friends a story about a man who went on a journey. The day the man left home to start on his journey, it was very hot. The sun was bright and blazing in the sky. The earth beneath the man's feet was burning hot. The man had not gone very far before his head began to ache. The heat made him feel very tired and drowsy. His mouth felt dry. "I must find some water, or I shall die of thirst," he said to himself. He began to look for water. The first well he came to was dry, and so was the second well. The man began to feel hotter and hotter, and then at last he found another well and saw that it was full of water. "Alhamdulillah, Allah be praised," the man said. "I have found water at last. Now I can drink." Then the man remembered that he hadn't brought a rope or a bucket with him. He searched round the well and looked inside, then searched again, but there was no bucket or rope to be found. "How am I going to get the water?" he thought. There was only one way. He had to climb down into the well. Carefully, the man climbed over the side of the well and began to climb downwards. He was so tired from the heat that he found it very difficult. But after a while, he began to feel better because the well was nice and cool inside. At long last, the man reached the water. He put his hand down and felt the cool water between his fingers. It was a wonderful feeling. The man drank the water until he no longer felt thirsty. Then he rubbed the water over his face and neck. He dipped the corner of his robe in the water so that they would keep him cool for a while he left the well. The man felt much better now. Water is the liquid of life, he thought, and Allah is the giver of water. Allah be praised. When the man had finished, he began to climb up out of the well. It was difficult and took a lot of strength, but at last the man reached the top of the well and climbed out again onto the hot ground. Suddenly, he heard a sound. It was a dog whining and crying. The man turned around and saw the dog nearby. The poor animal was very thirsty. Its mouth was open and it was panting. The dog was sniffing at the ground, and the man could see that it was tired and thirsty. The dog came up to him and began to lick the bottom of his robe where it was wet. The man felt great pity for the dog. "This poor animal is thirsty, just as I was thirsty until I found this well," he said. "He will die of thirst if he doesn't get water." The man stroked the dog's head. The dog wagged his tail. He was grateful for the water he had licked from the man's wet robe. "Wait here," the man said. "I'll get you some water." The man put first one leg, then the other leg over the side of the well and began to climb downwards once more. Because he was no longer thirsty, he found the climb much easier than before, until they were full. Then he put the edges of the socks into his mouth and held them very firmly between his teeth. He began to climb up the well again. But it was hard this time. The socks full of water were very heavy, and his mouth and teeth began to hurt. But the man didn't stop. Slowly he climbed until he reached the top of the well. When he touched the ground again, he knelt down, opening the first sock so that the dog could easily get his muzzle inside. The dog drank all the water without stopping. Then the man opened the second sock, and he drank all the water in that sock too. All the time he drank, the dog's tail was wagging. The man smiled. "This dog is happy now," he said. "He will not die of thirst, and neither will I." Allah was very pleased with the man who had treated the thirsty dog so kindly. For this kind act, Allah forgave the man the sins he had committed in his life. Here the Prophet came to the end of the story. After the Prophet had finished speaking, one of his companions said, "O Messenger of Allah, if we are good to animals, will we also be forgiven our sins?" "Yes," the Prophet replied, "you will be rewarded for being good to all living creatures." The man in the story went to paradise for his kind act.
This story is about a cruel woman and her cat.
There was once a woman who had a cat. She was a cruel woman and treated her cat badly. One day, the Prophet told his friends a story about this bad woman. She did not look after the cat properly, he said. She did not give it anything to eat or drink. Because of this, the cat became very thin, and its fur began to fall out. This woman had a very bad temper. When she was angry, she used to kick her cat or throw it out through the door and make it stay out in the street all night. Before long, the cat became very frightened of the woman. Each time she came near it, the cat cried and hid underneath a table or a chair. The woman's neighbors were very angry with her. One day, a neighbor came to see her. "You are very cruel to your cat," the neighbor said. "A cat is one of Allah's living creatures, just as we are. You are doing a great wrong." The woman was very angry when she heard this. "Go away," she shouted at her neighbor. "The cat belongs to me. I will treat it badly if I want to. Go away. Leave me alone." The neighbor was very unhappy to hear this. Then he thought of a plan to save the cat. He went back to his house and waited until nightfall. Next door, he heard the cruel woman shouting at her cat. "Get out of here, you dirty animal!" she was shouting. "I will not have you in my house tonight." The neighbor heard the cruel woman open her front door. Then he heard the cat crying and howling as the woman threw it out into the street. Then she slammed her door shut. The neighbor waited for a few moments to make sure the woman would not come out of her house again. Then he went out into the street. There was the cat, sitting pitifully by the woman's front door. The cat was crying and sniffing at the door, hoping the woman would open it and let it in. The neighbor's heart was filled with pity for the cat. "You poor creature," he said. "Look how thin you are." He bent down and picked up the cat. He stroked its head until it stopped crying. "I'll take you to my house, and I'll give you some food," the neighbor said. When he got back to his house, he filled a plate with food and gave it to the cat. The cat ate hungrily. Soon the plate was empty. The neighbor filled the plate again. Again It ate all the food very quickly. But at last the cat had had enough and lay down on the floor and fell fast asleep.
Two. The Cruel Woman and Her Cat.
Next morning, the cruel woman could not find her cat. She looked everywhere. She searched in the street, she searched in the market, but the cat was nowhere to be found. The woman was very angry. "Someone has stolen my cat," she said to herself. Then she remembered what her neighbour had said the previous day. He had tried to stop her treating her cat cruelly. "That neighbour of mine has my cat," she said. "He must be the one who has stolen it." So she went to her neighbour's house. She banged on the door and shouted angrily. The neighbour opened the door. "I know you have stolen my cat," the woman shouted at him. "You are a thief! Give it back to me at once." "No," said the neighbour, "you are a cruel woman. You do not deserve to have a cat." "I want that cat. Give it back," the woman shouted. She was getting angrier and angrier. "I will not give you your cat until you promise that you will treat it kindly," the neighbour replied. When the woman heard that, she laughed to herself. "Silly man," she thought. "All I have to do is promise to treat my cat well, and he will give it back to me." So the woman pretended not to be angry any more. She smiled at her neighbour. "Of course I will treat the cat well if you give it back to me," she said in a friendly voice. "You promise?" the neighbour demanded. "Yes, yes, I promise," the woman replied. "You will give the cat enough to eat, and you will not throw it out of the house at night?" "Of course not," the woman said sweetly. "I will feed the cat and look after it properly from now on. I will not be cruel to my cat ever again." Did the woman keep her promise? No, she did not. Unfortunately, though, the neighbour had believed her. He had not thought that she was telling lies. He gave the cat back to her. The cruel woman took the cat back to her house and treated it more cruelly than ever before. She tied a rope round its neck, and then she tied the rope to a chair. Once again, she gave the poor cat nothing to eat or drink. It became thinner and thinner and weaker and weaker. After a short while, it died. "What a terrible thing to do," cried one of the friends of the prophet. "What a very cruel and wicked woman." The prophet agreed. This made Allah very angry with the cruel woman, he told his friends. Of course, the woman was not only cruel, she had told lies as well. She had committed a great sin because she had ill-treated one of Allah's living creatures. The man who gave the thirsty dog water was forgiven his sins because he acted kindly towards a living creature. But this woman, who treated her cat cruelly, was not forgiven her sins. Allah sent her to hell.
The next story is called The Crying Camel.
The city of Medina, where the Prophet, peace be upon him, lived, was a beautiful city. There were many gardens around the city. In the gardens, there were many trees. When the sun shone brightly during the daytime, the trees gave cool shade. The Muslims who lived in Medina used to sit in the shade to get out of the hot, burning sun. One day, the Prophet went for a walk through Medina to meet with the Muslims and talk to them. After a while, he came to a garden and went in. There was a man sitting under a tree in the cool shade. There were many other Muslims in the garden too. Then, the Prophet saw a camel standing in one corner of the garden. The camel was tied to a post. It was making a pitiful howling sound. The Prophet walked over to where the camel was tied up. As he got closer, he saw that the camel was crying. Big tears were rolling down its cheeks and making the fur in its face all wet. The Prophet felt great pity for the camel. He went up to it and stroked its fur and wiped away its tears. The Prophet saw that the camel was very thin. After a while, the camel stopped crying and howling. It gave a snort, as camels do when they're pleased. The Prophet looked around at all the people standing in the garden. "Who's the owner of this camel?" he asked. The man who had been sitting beneath the tree stepped forward. "I am the owner of the camel, O Messenger of God," he said. The Prophet told him that he had been very cruel to the camel. The poor animal was howling and crying because its owner made it work very hard, but didn't give it enough to eat and drink. Everyone in the garden could see how thin the camel was and how cruelly the man had acted towards the camel. When the owner of the camel heard this, he began to feel ashamed. "Do you not fear Allah because of this camel?" the Prophet asked him. Allah had given the camel to the man's care to help him in his work and carry burdens for him. The man had a duty to treat the camel well and see that it had enough to eat and drink. If he did so, the camel would work well for him. The owner of the camel now felt very ashamed indeed. "I have done wrong," he said. "The camel is one of Allah's living creatures. I am sorry for my cruelty. All living creatures must be treated kindly. The Prophet always taught that if they were treated well, Allah would be pleased, but if they were treated badly, Allah would be angry." The camel owner never forgot what the Prophet told him. After this, he always looked after his camels properly. Although the camels still worked hard, for they were strong animals, the man always saw that they had enough food and water.
Our last story is about a sparrow and her two fledglings.
One day, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was travelling with some companions. After they had gone some way, they decided to stop and rest. The Prophet left his companions for a short time, and while he was away, they amused themselves, watching the birds flying around in the sky. There were many different sorts of birds. Then, one of the Prophet's companions pointed upwards. he said to the others. "There is a pretty bird. It looks like a mother bird, because there are 2 young birds with her. The 2 young birds must be her fledglings." The bird was a sparrow, and the 2 small birds were indeed her fledglings. The 3 birds flew round and round above the men's heads. They watched them with pleasure, because the birds were very beautiful. But the young fledglings were not so good at flying as their mother was. Gradually, as they flew above the heads of the men, they began to get lower and lower. "Let's catch them," one of the men cried. "It will be so easy." The others agreed with him, and after a while the little fledglings came low enough for them to put up their hands and catch them. When the little birds felt the hands close around them, they struggled and shrieked in fright. But the men were too strong for them, and however hard they struggled, they could not escape. At last, the little birds were exhausted and lay still. The Prophet's friends came to look at them. They stroked the birds' feathers with their fingers. They were very gentle with the birds, because the Prophet had always told them that they must treat living creatures kindly and gently. They did not mean to harm the birds. They just wanted to have a close look at them. But the mother bird, flying round and round high above their heads, did not know this. She thought the men meant to kill her babies, or at least keep them as captives. So she cried and shrieked and kept on swooping down near the men, trying to make them let go of the 2 little birds. The men waved their arms to keep her away, and before long the mother bird was very distressed. She cried and shrieked more loudly than ever. Suddenly, while all this was going on, the Prophet returned. He saw the mother bird flying round and round and heard her crying. At once he realized she was very unhappy, and when he saw his companions holding the little birds, he knew what had caused her such unhappiness. "Who has caused trouble to this sparrow by taking away her young ones?" the Prophet wanted to know. "The little birds must be released," he told his friends. "They should be allowed to join their mother, who was frightened for their safety." The Prophet's companions obeyed him at once. They opened their hands. The little birds struggled for a while, and then spread their wings and flew upwards. They reached their mother high up in the sky, and together the 3 birds flew away and out of sight. It was a happy thing to see.
Muslims are required to invoke Allah's blessing and peace upon the Prophet whenever his name is mentioned. The Islamic Foundation presents Stories of the Caliphs, a series of stories about the simple and devoted lives of the Prophet and the Caliphs.
Before the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, died, he was successful in bringing all of Arabia from one end to another under the rule of one God. No person was master of another. All were equal before their God. He alone was their master. To him alone did they submit. To govern justly and kindly according to the law of God, and to care for people were as much acts of worship as to pray, to fast, and to perform pilgrimage. This was what the blessed Prophet taught and practiced. After he died, his followers chose Abu Bakr to lead them and rule over them. He was called Khalifa Rasulallah, which means successor to the messenger of God. They called him Khalifa or Caliph, as he was not only a successor of the blessed Prophet in government, but he was also bound to lead the people on the path to Allah in accordance with his guidance and the traditions and examples given by the blessed Prophet. For Caliph also means agent or viceroy. They also called him Amirul Mu'minin, which means the ruler of the believers. After Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali were elected caliphs. All were true followers of the blessed Prophet and closely observed his example. There were many other caliphs after them who were called caliphs, but not all of them followed in the footsteps of the blessed Prophet. Many lived luxuriously, did not act justly, oppressed people, and denied them their rights, did not alleviate their misery and poverty, and used public money for their own comfort. However, those who did follow the blessed Prophet left glorious examples for others to follow. These were honest men. They lived simply. They ate and dressed like ordinary people. They were just and kind. They dedicated themselves to serving their brothers and sisters and their fellow citizens, and thus they served their God. Even their governors and civil servants conducted themselves as nobly as did the caliphs. The caliph is the most important person in a Muslim state, but he is not the sovereign, nor are the people. God only is sovereign. No caliph, nor even the entire Muslim nation, can make any law which is against the law of God, nor can any caliph be obeyed against his law. The caliph is the head of state, the spiritual leader of Muslims. He has the enormous responsibility to see that the people live according to God's will, in peace and happiness. They do not live in hunger, unsheltered, uneducated, and uncared for. Good prospers and evil is weakened. Justice is done in all manners and matters, and oppression is put down. Public money in the government treasury is spent for the welfare of the people. Law and order are maintained throughout the land. The penalties as decreed by God for serious social crimes are fully carried out. You can see from this list what an important job a caliph has. Because the caliphs were successors to the blessed Prophet, they looked after their people as a father would his children. This involved doing three things. Firstly, they set a good example in their own lives and showed others how to live properly. They never used their office nor the treasury for their own ends. Secondly, they were very particular in taking good care of the poor and needy. And thirdly, they treated all as equals, the mighty and the weak, the high and the low, the rich and the poor. Here are some stories about the early caliphs.
Our first story is How the Blessed Prophet Lived.
One day, Umar came to the Prophet's house to see him. The blessed Prophet lived in a small apartment which bordered his mosque. These apartments are now included in the beautifully built Mosque of the Prophet in Medina, but at that time the walls were built of mud and stones, the roof of palm leaves and stalks, and the floors of sand. The doors gave on to the courtyard and hall of prayer. Umar came to the door and sought permission to enter. "May Umar bin al-Khattab enter, O Prophet of God?" said Umar. "Yes, come in, Umar," the blessed Prophet replied. Umar entered the room where the blessed Prophet was resting. He first greeted the blessed Prophet. "Peace be with you." "And with you be peace," replied the blessed Prophet. Umar sat down on the floor and began to notice the room for the first time. There was no bed in the room. The blessed Prophet was lying on a mat. Part of his body was on the floor and part on the mat. The mat was rough and the floor hard. The marks from the mat were visible on his body. He was wearing a garment of rough and coarse cloth. He had a pillow, but the pillow was filled with prickly leaves from a palm tree. There was nothing else in the room. No wardrobe, no rich food to eat, no comfortable mattresses. Instead, in a corner were some berry leaves and a small heap of barley, over which an untreated piece of leather was hanging. Tears began to well up in Umar's eyes. When the blessed Prophet saw Umar crying, he asked him, "Why? What are you crying about, Umar?" Umar answered in a bitter voice, "And why shouldn't I cry, O Prophet of God? I see your bedding and the marks from the mat on your back. I see all your belongings which amount to nothing, and yet you are the prophet of God and his chosen messenger. The emperors of the Byzantine and the Persian empires are living in luxury and comfort. Their thrones are made of gold, and their clothing and bedding are made of the finest silks. Umar waved his arm to illustrate. And this is all you have. This is your treasure. The blessed prophet smiled and looked kindly and affectionately at Umar. Are you not happy, O Umar, that we shall receive our riches and treasures and comforts in the eternal life? The kings of this world have received their full share here, and even this share is going to be useless for them as soon as they depart from this world. Our share is to come later, but once we receive it, it will remain with us forever. Umar understood then that the government the blessed prophet was going to establish was not a government of kings and emperors, but a government of the servants of Allah, who live not for this world and its transient rewards and comforts, but for the world to come, for the everlasting rewards and treasures to be found in the hereafter.
Our second story is the Caliph's Salary.
As you know, Abu Bakr was the first caliph to be elected by Muslims to rule over them and manage their affairs. Early the next morning, after his election, Abu Bakr appeared in the marketplace. All his life he had been a merchant who sold cloth, so as usual he was still trying to be a merchant even though he had been named caliph and ruler of Arabia. People were sorely puzzled when they saw him arrive, loaded down with rolls of cloth on his shoulders, but they just didn't know what to do about it. Finally, when Umar appeared, he immediately went up to Abu Bakr and said, "What are you doing with all this cloth?" "I'm going to the bazaar," said Abu Bakr. "What for?" asked Umar. "You have now to manage and run the affairs of the entire Muslim community. How can you find time to carry on business?" "But I have to earn my livelihood," replied Abu Bakr. "Otherwise, how shall I feed my family?" Umar thought for a moment. Then he said, "We have to find a way of solving this problem. Obviously, you cannot find time to continue selling cloth. Come with me, and let us go and consult other Muslim brothers." Umar went with Abu Bakr to see Abu Ubaidah. He was in charge of the treasury. He was also declared by the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, to be the most trustworthy and honest person in the whole Muslim community. Other responsible leaders of the community were called in for consultation as well. Umar proposed that a salary should be fixed for Abu Bakr to be paid out of the public treasury and which would take care of his needs. But how much? That was the question. Abu Ubaidah proposed Abu Bakr should be given a salary equivalent to what is needed by an ordinary lower middle-class man to sustain himself. After some discussion, the first caliph's salary was fixed as follows. He would be allotted 2 sheets of cloth in summer and 2 sheets of cloth in winter. In addition, he would be given food for himself and his family for every day. Abu Bakr happily accepted this allowance, but at the same time he deposited every penny that he had of his own in the public treasury. It was not necessary, but he insisted on doing so because he did not consider it honest to keep his own wealth while the treasury was taking care of his needs. Abu Bakr gave up his business, for his Muslim brothers wanted him to do so. He and his family continued to live on the small grant which the Muslims had given him. The money was only just enough to support his family, and he had only a modest standard of living, but he lived contentedly and in peace and happiness. One day his wife came to him and said, "I wish we could afford to buy some sugar. I want to make some sweets for you." "Dear wife," replied Abu Bakr, "I'm afraid we have no money. You could go to the Baytul Mal, the public treasury, for some, but the money in the public treasury belongs to the people. It has to be used for their welfare and for the state. It would not be right for us to take any more than what has been fixed as our salary." His wife graciously accepted what Abu Bakr said, but she still wanted to make him some sweets. So every day she saved a little something from the money she had for housekeeping. After a few days she had enough money to buy some sugar and make some sweets, which she did. "How did you manage to buy sugar to make sweets?" said Abu Bakr, when he saw the sweets at dinner. His wife replied, "I saved a little money each day from the housekeeping. That is where I got the money from." "I am amazed," said Abu Bakr. "Although you have saved money every day to buy sugar, we still seem to have eaten well. This shows that we have been taking more money from the treasury than we really need." Abu Bakr then reduced even further his own very small grant from the government, and he and his wife lived off that small grant for the rest of their lives. Around 2 years later, when Abu Bakr was about to die, he called all his children to his bedside. "I would like to know the total sum of what I have used from the treasury," said Abu Bakr. The children made calculations and told him the exact amount that he had drawn from the public treasury. "When I am dead, sell my property and deposit whatever I have in the Baytul Mal, so that every penny has been replaced," said Abu Bakr. By this final and conclusive decision, he left nothing in his will, but repaid all that he had received from the state during his lifetime. When Umar, who was elected to fill the vacancy caused by the death of Abu Bakr, was informed of Abu Bakr's last decision, he simply wept. "Oh, Abu Bakr, you have set an example which those who come after you will find almost impossible to follow."
Our third story is The Caliph's Clothes.
Umar, who was the second caliph, received the same salary as Abu Bakr. He used to dress simply and eat frugally. He used to wear old clothes which had patches and were threadbare. His shoes often had holes in them. He often had nothing to eat but barley bread and olive oil. And yet, under him, the Islamic government extended as far and wide as Iran, Iraq, Syria, Egypt, and even North Africa. The Roman and Iranian empires crumbled, and their riches and treasures flowed into Medina. Umar was a wise, just, and popular caliph. He had many friends who loved him because he was such a good man, but even so his friends could not understand why he dressed so badly and ate so poorly. "It is not right," they used to say. "Don't you see how he dresses and how he lives? We Muslims have entered Iran and Iraq. We now rule over fertile lands. We have wealth and riches. There is no need for our caliph to go around in old, tattered clothes and have almost nothing to eat. Kings and princes and ambassadors and deputations come here from many lands and mighty empires, and they wear tunics of the finest silk. Why cannot our caliph be like them? Umar has just got to say the word, and our tailors will make him the finest clothes in the world, and our cooks will cook the finest foods, which will be brought to him in the morning as well as the evening." One day, an ambassador of the Roman Empire came to Medina. He wanted to obtain an audience with Umar. He was used to palaces and kings, so he asked people in the streets, "Where does your king live?" "We have no king," said the Muslims to whom he had put the question. "But you have someone who is the head of your government?" asked the bewildered ambassador. "Yes, we have appointed one from amongst us who looks after the affairs of state. If you go straight up this road, you might find him somewhere." The Roman ambassador went up the road to which he was directed. Finally he found Umar resting under the shade of a tree, wearing 2 garments, one of which had 12 patches. Finally, people could not take it any longer. Knowing that Umar was facing extreme hardship, they assembled and began discussing the matter. "I think we should propose to Umar that his salary be increased so that he may dress more appropriately, thereby making a better impression on visiting ambassadors and deputations. Also, he would be able to buy and prepare good food for himself as well as for the others who come to visit him," said Zubair, one of the close followers of the Prophet. "I fully agree with you. I was also thinking along the same lines," said Ali. Believing that Ali would be the most suitable man to talk to Umar about this matter, they asked Ali to place the matter before him. But Ali said, "I certainly do not dare go to Umar and talk to him about this." So Uthman came forward with a suggestion. We all know how Umar is. He will hardly like the idea of taking more from the treasury. Let us first somehow find out how he will take the proposal. Let us go to Hafsa, his daughter, and seek her help. All those present agreed with Uthman's suggestion, and so they went to find Hafsa. Now Hafsa had also been one of the wives of the blessed Prophet. For this reason they felt that Hafsa could persuade her father to give up wearing old clothes, or at least she should find out how he would react to their proposal. Hafsa listened to them and said, "I agree with you, but even I do not find the courage to go to him and talk about this matter. I want to help you, but let us seek the help of Aisha." Aisha was the daughter of Abu Bakr, and had also been one of the wives of the blessed Prophet. Umar greatly respected her. They found her in agreement with their proposal, as she also realized the hardships which Umar was facing. "I shall go to Umar and have a word with him and find out how he feels about this proposal," said Aisha. "I don't think he will ever agree," added Hafsa, "but at least we shall know." "Don't tell him who we are," they requested as they left. The next day, Aisha and Hafsa went to Umar. Hafsa, seeing her father sitting there in clothes which were old and patched, shook her head and sighed. Aisha said to Umar, "O Chief of Muslims, do I have permission to talk to you about a certain matter?" "I don't think he will ever agree," added Hafsa, "but at least we shall know." "Don't tell him who we are," they requested as they left. The next day, Aisha and Hafsa went to Umar. Hafsa, seeing her father sitting there in clothes which were old and patched, shook her head and sighed. Aisha said to Umar, "O Chief of Muslims, do I have permission to talk to you about a certain matter?" "Yes, with great pleasure, O Mother of Muslims," said Umar. Aisha chose her words carefully. "Allah has blessed you with the conquest of the treasures and cities of Heraclius, the Emperor of Byzantium, and Khosroes, the Emperor of Persia, ambassadors from important foreign powers and deputations from within Arabia come to visit you and stay with you, and you are wearing a cloak which has 12 patches. If only you would wear fine, handsome clothing and serve more succulent meals, you would make a better impression on those who visit you." "Father," said Hafsa, "please forgive me for interrupting, but I have a serious question to ask you." "Please ask your question, my child," replied Umar. "Dear father, what I want to know is this," she said. "Why ever do you wear such old clothes? Why do you go about with clothes which are patched and threadbare? When people come to the Caliph, they expect to see someone dressed like a Caliph, and what is more, you don't seem to notice that you are wearing old clothes." For a while Umar kept silent. Aisha and Hafsa thought that the Caliph must surely be angry. Then tears began to well up in Umar's eyes. He wiped away the tears with his sleeve and then smiled sadly. He knew how much courage it took for Aisha and his daughter to speak to him about such matters, For a long while he said nothing. Then he looked at them carefully and said to them, "You were the wives of the Prophet. If anyone knows how he lived, you do." Then he turned to Aisha. "Tell us, O mother of Muslims, did the Prophet ever eat wheat bread, or 3 days running? Was his stomach ever full? Or did he ever have complete meals both in the morning and in the evening?" "No," said Aisha, "not till the day he died." "And you know, Aisha, that the Prophet had a cloak without a lining which he used to put on in the daytime, on which he used to sleep at night?" said Umar. "Yes," said Aisha. Umar continued, "And there was a mat in his house on which the Prophet used to sit in the daytime, and when night came he used to sleep on the same mat?" Aisha could not contradict him. "Yes, you are right, Umar." And then Umar turned to Hafsa. "Tell me, when the Prophet went to sleep, what did he use for a bed? Didn't you tell me, Hafsa, something like this? I had a mat in my room. When the Prophet wanted to go to sleep, I used to spread the mat out on the floor, so he would lie down on that mat, but the mat was rough and the floor hard. Very often he woke up with the marks from the mat on his back. In fact, I felt he did not sleep at all well on the mat. And didn't you, Hafsa, also tell me, one night I folded the mat over double to make it more comfortable for him to sleep on, and that night the Prophet slept so well, in fact, that he did not get up for the pre-dawn prayer. Only when Bilal called the azan did he wake up. As soon as he woke up, he asked me, 'Oh, Hafsa, what did you do with the mat last night?' When I told him, he asked me not to fold the mat over double again. He wanted to sleep on the mat as it was before. And don't you know, Hafsa, that all the Prophet's errors were forgiven? Still he used to be hungry when evening came, and used to stand and bow and prostrate himself before Allah for long hours during the night. You have both been the wife of the Prophet. You both are the mothers of Muslims," said Umar to Aisha and Hafsa. "Have you come to me in order to lead me to the comforts of this world, to give up the rewards of the hereafter? The only example I would like to follow is the example of my 2 friends, Muhammad and Abu Bakr. I know I wear old clothes, and I know my friends all talk about me for doing so. My clothes are uncomfortable and look awful. So is my food, which many do not want to share with me. But I also know that the Prophet and Abu Bakr lived a very simple life and cared little for their own comfort. So answer me this question. When the Prophet lived like this, caring so little for his own comfort, how can we, his followers, want to live in luxury? And can't you see I do this for the love of the Prophet and Allah? And finally, will you tell me who sent you to me with this proposal?" asked Umar. "This I cannot tell you," said Hafsa. But neither Aisha nor Hafsa could say a single word, nor could any of the Caliph's friends who were told of what Umar has said.
Our 4th story is Umar helps the poor and hungry.
Umar was the 2nd Caliph. He succeeded Abu Bakr. Umar was hard-working and conscientious, because he was a true servant of God. A caliph should take care of the Muslims in his state as a father takes care of his children. Umar tried his very best to do this. In the daytime he used to work at home. At night he often went out into the city of Medina to help any of his people who were in need. One night Umar was walking down a street in the city when he heard some children crying. The crying came from a small house. When Umar looked in, he saw a lady sitting with her children around her. The lady looked very sad, and the children seemed to be very hungry. Umar noticed that there was a pot on the fire. He thought that there must be some food in the pot, and soon the lady would give it to the children, and then they would stop crying. Umar watched and waited while the contents of the pot kept boiling away, but still the lady did not feed the children. In the end he wondered what was the matter. Finally, Umar went into the house and asked the lady why her children were crying. She told him they were crying because they were hungry. "Isn't the food in the pot ready yet?" he asked. The lady came close to Umar and whispered in his ears, "Do not tell the children there is no food in the pot, because I do not have any money to buy food. The pot has only water in it, but the children think there is some food in there. They are hungry now, but if I wait long enough they will cry themselves to sleep. Then they will forget their hunger." When the children finally dropped off to sleep, the lady explained to Umar that her husband had just died. That was why she had no money to buy food. Unfortunately, the people in charge of the Baytul Mal did not know of the lady's trouble. If they had known, they would have helped her. Then Umar, who was very sorry for the poor woman, said to her, "Why ever did you not tell the Caliph about this?" "I am a woman," answered the lady. "I cannot go about looking for the Caliph to tell him my troubles. If he is really the Caliph, he should know about them. It is his duty to help people in trouble. I feel our Caliph is not doing his duty properly. Umar has let me down. I don't think he ought to be Caliph if this is how he treats his fellows who are in need." Umar was shocked when he heard what the lady said. He ran to the Baytul Mal and put some flour, meat and sugar in a bag. As he was going to take it back to the lady, one of his servants stopped him and offered to carry the bag for him. "I shall carry the bag myself," said Umar. "On the day of judgment, you will not be able to carry my burdens for me, so there is no reason why you should carry them today." The Caliph carried the bag of food to the lady's house. When he got there, he himself cooked the food for the children, and it was he who fed them. As he was leaving the house, the lady said to him, "You should be Caliph, not Umar. You are kind, generous, and understanding. That is what a Caliph should be like." "Lady," replied the Caliph, "I am Umar. It was wrong of me not to know of your trouble, but now your children have been fed and are sleeping happily. I have also arranged that from today on the Baytul Mal will give you a grant so that you will be able to support them properly until they grow up."
Our fifth story is the Caliph's Feast.
Umar bin Abdul Aziz was another caliph who feared God and followed the example of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him. He was called Umar II. Many of his predecessors had not been good rulers, but he lived a simple life, even though he ruled over vast territories from the Atlantic Ocean in the west to the river Indus in the east. Before he became caliph, he also lived luxuriously like all members of his family, the Umayyads, who ruled over the Muslims after Ali. But as soon as he assumed the caliphate, he gave up all luxuries. He restored justice and rule of law. He confiscated all the wealth and lands illegally acquired by the members of his ruling family and returned them either to the treasury or to the rightful owners. Every day he worked hard and tried to show others by his own efforts how to live properly. Many of his officials followed his example. Although they were important people, they also lived good, simple lives. Some officials, however, took little notice of what the caliph said or did. Among these was Bismillah, who was head of the Muslim army. Bismillah was an excellent soldier. He was a brave and fearless man whom the soldiers loved and respected, but he had one weakness. He was much too fond of good food. He used to spend at least 1,000 dirhams a day on food for himself alone. When Umar came to hear about this, he was unhappy. He thought about the poor and the needy. 1,000 dirhams a day could provide an awful lot of food for those who had none. Because Umar was the caliph, he felt he had to do something about his friend's greed, but it was difficult to know how to go about it. He thought long and carefully about the problem. Suddenly he had an idea. Umar sent a servant to Bismillah and invited him to lunch the next day. He then summoned his cook and said to him, "Tomorrow I want you to prepare the finest lunch you have ever made. I leave it to you to decide what to cook. I have invited Bismillah to come and eat. Prepare whatever you think will really please him. And when you have done all that, cook a bowl of porridge as well." The cook thought the caliph had taken leave of his senses, but he did as he was told. Bismillah looked forward to dining with the Caliph. In fact, by the time he arrived at the Caliph's house, he was already very hungry. The Caliph received him kindly and began asking questions about the army. How were the soldiers doing? Where were they training? Had the officers in the army enough men? And so on and so forth. The more the Caliph talked, the hungrier Bismillah became. Of course, he could not let the Caliph know how hungry he was. That would not have been polite. But he felt the pangs of hunger all the same. The Caliph knew, anyway, how Bismillah felt. He could tell by the look on Bismillah's face that he was absolutely starving. Suddenly, Umar stopped asking questions and called for the cook. The cook came quickly. He was expecting the Caliph to ask him to bring in the huge meal which he had so carefully prepared. The Caliph looked at the cook and said with a smile, "Bismillah is getting hungry. Bring him a little something to keep him going until lunchtime. Bring in the food I asked you to prepare last of all." The cook, dismayed by this request, came back with the bowl of porridge, which he placed before the Caliph, who offered it to Bismillah, who was so hungry that he immediately started to gobble it down. When Bismillah had finished eating the porridge, Umar asked him a few more questions. Then he called for his cook again and asked him to bring in the lunch. The cook was delighted. He had worked very hard to prepare such a splendid meal. Bismillah just loved roast peacock, curried lamb, saffron rice, honey cakes, and sweetmeats. But Bismillah took one look at the food and said, "I'm afraid I cannot eat another mouthful. I'm full up after eating the bowl of porridge." When Umar heard this, he said, "My dear friend, the oats for this porridge did not cost more than 1 dirham. Tell me, if you can eat well for 1 dirham, why do you spend more than 1,000 dirhams a day buying food for yourself alone? Allah does not like spendthrifts. If you spent those 1,000 dirhams on the poor and needy, Allah would love you more." Bismillah was so impressed by what the Caliph said that from that day on he spent much more of his money on helping the poor than on feeding himself.
Our last story is The Governor Who Was a Pauper.
In the days when Umar was Caliph, he was presented with a problem which he found very difficult to solve. After considerable thought, he summoned his friend and colleague Sa'id bin Amir to his side. "Sa'id," said Umar, "I just don't know what to do. The people of Homs have come to me for the 5th time complaining about their governor. I have tried to accommodate them by appointing men whom I thought were suitable, but apparently each one turned out to be a disappointment in one way or another. There just isn't anyone left to whom I can entrust such a position, except," he added, "for one who happens to be facing me at this moment. And so," continued Umar with a smile, "I hereby appoint you governor of Homs." Sa'id was completely taken aback. He knew the people of Homs were difficult to accommodate. Sa'id felt he was in no way qualified to govern anyone, let alone the people of Homs. He shook his head unhappily. "Umar," he said, "by Allah, I plead with you not to place such a trial before me. I could never undertake such a position." "What?" exclaimed Umar, suddenly losing his temper. "You helped saddle me with the responsibility of the caliphate, and now you won't help me carry out that responsibility? I won't stand for it, Sa'id. You will just have to accept this appointment, whether you want to or not. This is an order I am giving you." Sa'id had no other option but to obey Umar. After he had settled his affairs in Medina, he reluctantly came to say goodbye to Umar. "Now, brother," said Umar, appeased, "don't look so distressed. I am convinced that with Allah's help you will be able to handle the job perfectly well. Now, one last matter. Let us decide on your salary." Sa'id looked surprised. "What do I need with a salary? What I receive from the treasury is more than enough." Umar laughed. "Allah will be with you, Sa'id," he said, and to show that he was well pleased, embraced him and sent him on his way. Off went Sa'id to Homs, and for some time Umar heard nothing from that part of the world. Umar was relieved. Things must finally be going smoothly, he said to himself. I was right in appointing Sa'id. One day a delegation from the people of Homs turned up at Umar's house, as was customary several times a year. Umar asked them for news of their district, and they replied to Umar's satisfaction. Finally, Umar asked to be shown a list of the poor and destitute, that they could be given funds from the general treasury. The list was given to Umar, who checked it over and frowned. "Who is this Sa'id bin Amir? Can there be two such people with the same name?" he asked. "Certainly not," replied the delegate. "That is Sa'id bin Amir, our governor." "What? You write his name down here as if he were a pauper?" "But he is a pauper, respected brother," replied the other with arms outstretched. "He's the poorest amongst us. Days pass when you will not smell cooking from his stove, I warrant you." Umar dropped his head, and when he raised it again, the visitor noticed his beard was damp with tears. "We shall take care of this," said Umar softly, and asked the delegation to retire. When the delegation headed home the next day, they were carrying 1,000 sovereigns from the Caliph Umar to be given to Sa'id bin Amir, governor of Homs. Once back at Homs, the delegation proudly presented the gift to Sa'id in a sheepskin purse. Sa'id thanked them warmly, but when they had left and he discovered what the purse contained, his face paled, and he dropped the purse as if it was a curse. "From God we come, and to God we return," he murmured, as one does when faced with death. His wife, overhearing him, was shocked. "Oh, what has happened?" she exclaimed. "Who is dead? Did the Amirul Mu'minin die?" "Worse than that," answered Sa'id. "Worse than that? What could be worse, dear husband?" "What would you say if something came to lure me away from the everlasting life? What would you say if corruption entered our house?" "Why, get rid of it," cried his wife. "Flee from it." "And will you help me do it?" asked Sa'id of his wife. "With pleasure, husband," she replied. So by the end of the day, the 1,000 sovereigns which Umar had given Sa'id were distributed amongst the poor of the regions of Homs. It wasn't long after that Umar, who was making his regular visit around the provinces, stopped at Homs. As soon as he arrived, the inhabitants gathered around and began complaining again about their governor. Umar was astounded and dismayed. "How do you expect me to believe you this time?" he scolded. 5 times in succession I have replaced a governor in Homs, and recently I have sent you the best man I have, a faithful and true servant of Islam, and still you dare to complain. This time I insist that Sa'id bin Amir be present in person to defend himself against your charges, and you will soon see, ungrateful lot that you are, how mistaken you must be." With this said, Umar marched off to his quarters, but in his heart he wondered secretly how Sa'id could have displeased these people, and he prayed to Allah that his good opinion and faith in Sa'id be not shaken. The next morning, everyone, including Sa'id, the governor, assembled at Umar's quarters. "Now," announced Umar in a loud voice, "may the first man who wishes to voice a complaint against your governor come forward." From out of the crowd stepped a young man, robust and strong, who was evidently not afraid to speak his opinion before the Caliph. "O leader of the faithful," he began, "the fact is that our governor is lazy. He does not come out of his house until late in the morning." "Not only that," interrupted another standing in the crowd, "but on some days we don't even see him until evening. Who knows what he does all day long in his house?" Umar winced at these accusations and turned to Sa'id and asked, "What is your explanation for this conduct?" Sa'id shook his head. "Allah is witness that what I am about to confess is both distasteful and embarrassing to me. The fact is that I have no servant to help me, so early in the morning I knead the dough, and then I bake bread. Following that I perform my ablutions, then I come to meet the people. Since I only have one change of clothes, sometimes I am also obliged to wash them and wait for them to dry. Sometimes I have to mend them before venturing out of my house." Now no one suspected that Sa'id had no servant. In those days everyone of importance had a servant, and certainly a governor would have more than one. This fact shed a different light on the accusations, and Umar's faith in his friend was restored. "Any more complaints?" called out Umar. "Yes, I have one," grumbled an old man. "We older citizens like to gather in the evenings and talk about the past, but Said here is unfriendly and never wants to join us." Umar turned again to Said for an explanation. "Well, the fact is that I would rather keep vigil at night and worship Allah than to talk idly of past glories," confessed Said. Umar smiled broadly at Said and called again to the crowd. "Are there any more complaints against this man who is your governor?" "Well, yes, there is," cried a merchant. "When he does join us, he quite often seems to be thinking of other things, and once he even fainted before our very eyes for no particular reason." At these words, Said's face turned dark, and he bowed his head for a moment. Umar waited for his friend to speak. Finally, Said began to explain in a low voice. "I have not always been a Muslim, as you know. There was a time when I was an idolater, and that period of my life is always horrible for me to remember. The time I passed out, I was remembering when Khubayb bin Adi was being tortured to death. I was there, and I watched as they cut his body into pieces, and he not dead yet." Here Said shielded his eyes with his hands and began to sob. "I did nothing to stop them. I just stood there. And then when they asked him if he would prefer Muhammad to be in his place, he replied, 'Never. 1,000 times will I accept death rather than allow even a thorn to prick Muhammad's side.' Ah, when I remember that, I did not lift a finger to help this saintly man. My self-disgust overwhelms me, and I feel as if God will never forgive me." A long silence followed this confession. Umar, touched by the story and proud of his friend, exclaimed, "Praise be to God! Said is indeed a true servant of God, and my faith in him is justified." Umar then sent another 1,000 sovereigns to Said in order to ease his situation. When his wife saw the money, she was delighted. "Praise be to God," she exclaimed. "Now we will be able to hire a servant to help us with the housework and have something left over for ourselves." "Dear wife," said Said, stroking his wife's head gently, "shall I tell you what would be even better than that?" "What could be better than that?" asked his wife. "We shall give it to someone who will give it back at a time when we might be in even greater need than now." "And how will that be?" asked the wife. "We shall give it as a loan to Allah," said Said, "for if we do so, then you may be sure it will return to us many times over." His wife agreed, and in no time at all the whole amount had again been distributed to the poor of the humps. Such were the natures of the men who ruled over the Islamic countries in the early days.
بالمحبة يصبح الناس أحبة الناس أحبة بالتعاون بالمحبة يصبح الناس أحبة الناس أحبة كلهم يملأ قلبه بالتآخي والمحبة أنا لا أحمل حقدا في فؤادي أو شرورا أنا لا أحمل حقدا في فؤادي أو شرورا مسلم أحمل ودا مالئا قلبي الطهورة بالتعاون بالمحبة يصبح الناس أحبة بالتعاون بالمحبة يصبح الناس أحبة كلهم يملأ قلبه يملأ قلبه بالتآخي والمحبة إنني أصنع خيرا وأعين الآخرين إنني أصنع خيرا وأعين الآخرين وبقومي عشت برا مخلص الحب أمينا بالتعاون بالمحبة يصبح الناس أحبة بالتعاون بالمحبة يصبح الناس أحبة كلهم يملأ قلبه بالتآخي والمحبة إن تعاوننا رفعنا شأننا بين الأنام إن تعاوننا رفعنا شأننا بين الأنام وسعدنا وغدونا في وداد وسلام بالتعاون بالمحبة يصبح الناس أحبة بالتعاون بالمحبة يصبح الناس أحبة كلهم يملأ قلبه بالتآخي والمحبة
Muslims are required to invoke Allah's blessing and peace upon the Prophet whenever his name is mentioned. The Islamic Foundation presents The Brave Boy, a series of stories about Ali bin Abu Talib and his courage and determination for Islam. Our first story is Ali and the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him.
The Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, had an uncle called Abu Talib. Abu Talib had been very kind to Muhammad. It was he who had looked after the blessed Prophet in his own house since Muhammad was 6 years old. All the time that Muhammad lived with Abu Talib, his uncle treated him like a son. He had given him all the love and care that a good father should. Muhammad in return had loved and honored his uncle. The blessed Prophet lived with Abu Talib until he got married to Khadija, and then he moved to a house of his own. When Abu Talib had a new son, Muhammad was delighted. He was as pleased as if he'd had a son of his own. As soon as he heard that the baby had been born, he hurried to his uncle's house to see the boy. The baby was in his mother's lap. He was small, clear-eyed, and very handsome. The blessed Prophet went to the little boy and kissed him on the forehead. "What are you going to call him?" he asked. "Ali," Abu Talib replied. As time went by, Muhammad got to know and love Ali. He became so fond of him that one day he went to Abu Talib and said, "Uncle, I know you love me as a son. I want to ask you to do something for me. Give Ali to me and let him come and live in my house. Khadija too will be very happy. We shall look after him and care for him, as you did for me." Abu Talib loved the blessed Prophet so much that he could not refuse his request. So Ali left his father's home and went to live with the blessed Prophet. In time, Ali came to help the blessed Prophet in his great work.
Our second story is Ali becomes a Muslim.
One day, when Ali was 10 years old, he came home and saw something strange. Muhammad was standing with his head bent forward and his hands folded on his chest. His wife Khadija was also standing beside him, doing the same thing. As Ali watched them, Muhammad and Khadija bowed towards the ground. They stayed in that position for a moment and then stood up straight again. Ali wondered what they were doing. Then he saw them go down on their knees and touch the ground with their foreheads. What a strange thing to do, thought Ali. I've often seen people bowing down before stone idols, but there's no idol here. Muhammad and Khadija are certainly not worshipping an idol, but they are worshipping someone. Ali was a sensible boy. Although he did not completely understand what Muhammad was doing, he knew he was praying. He thought Muhammad was praying to a God whom he could not see. Ali very much wanted to know who this unseen God was. As soon as Muhammad had finished his prayer, Ali asked him what he had been doing. Muhammad was pleased when the boy asked him to explain. He smiled at Ali and said to him, "Listen carefully, my boy. Khadija and I were worshipping Allah. He is the one and only true God. There is no God but He. Allah has chosen me to be His messenger. He has ordered me to take His message to my people. This is His message, and this is what I have to tell the people. They should give up all false gods and worship only Him. They must obey Him alone, because He is the one and only true God." Muhammad then looked Ali straight in the eyes and said to him, "You know how much I love you. I have looked after you as if you were my own son. I have never told you a lie. I have never deceived you. I want you to believe the truth that I have just told you. There is no God but Allah. He has chosen me as His prophet." Ali knew at once that Muhammad was speaking the truth, so he believed what Muhammad had said. The prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, was delighted. "Welcome, Ali," he said. "You know in your heart what I have said is true. I can see you have accepted Allah as the one and only true God. You are the first boy to become a Muslim."
Our third story is Abu Talib is worried about Ali.
One day, Ali was performing his prayer with the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him. They were praying with a few other Muslims in a secret mountain pass near Mecca. Suddenly, Ali's father, Abu Talib, appeared. He had come to look for his son. Abu Talib was a kind old man who often worried about Ali. When he saw how Muhammad and Ali were praying, he wondered what they were doing. He had never seen anyone pray like that before, and he began to feel uneasy. When Abu Talib saw that they had finished praying, he went over to them. "Muhammad," he said, "what on earth are you doing?" "We are praying," the blessed Prophet told him. "How can you be praying?" he said. "Where are the gods to which you should pray?" "When we pray, we do not pray to gods of stone," replied the blessed Prophet. "To whom then are you praying?" "We pray to Allah, the one and only true God." "But why do you pray to Him?" "Because I am the messenger of Allah. It is He who has told me to pray to Him alone. Come, uncle, join with us and worship Allah." When he heard this, Abu Talib replied, "How can I? I am an old man. I cannot join you and give up the religion of my own tribe." "But don't you see," said the blessed Prophet, "this is the true religion of our forefather Abraham." Abu Talib then went up to his son Ali, who was standing with the other Muslims. "What are you doing here, my son?" he asked him. "Have you also given up the religion of our forefathers?" Ali, young though he was, said to his father, "I have chosen to serve Allah. I am going to follow His Prophet Muhammad." When Abu Talib heard this, he was worried. He was afraid that Ali was going to be led astray. He feared his son had given up the religion of his forefathers, and this made him sad. He asked Ali to come back home and live with him, but Ali, though he loved his father dearly, did not want to go. The blessed Prophet saw how upset Abu Talib was, and so turning to Ali, he said, "Ali, you are free to do as you like. If you would like to go back and live with your father, please do." Ali replied that he would rather stay with the blessed Prophet and serve Allah. So Abu Talib left his son Ali with the blessed Prophet. He did not know what to do. He was unhappy because Ali had changed his religion, but he knew that Muhammad was a good and honest man. As he left, he said to the blessed Prophet, "Although I do not understand your religion, I trust you. You would never lead Ali into anything bad or evil. This I do know."
Our fourth story is Ali becomes a man.
Ali was a good boy. He was kind and considerate. He also knew how to work hard. One day, when he was about 11 years old, the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, called Ali to him. "I want to give a feast to the elders of our family," he said. "I would like you to be in charge of all the preparations. You must also invite the guests." Ali felt very honored that the blessed Prophet had asked him to be in charge of the feast. He invited all the elders of the family and saw to it that the food was properly prepared. All the elders of the family came to the feast. Among them was Abu Lahab, who was one of the blessed Prophet's uncles. Abu Lahab was an evil man. Throughout his life, all he had thought about was making money. He would do anything to make money. He used to tell lies. He used to cheat the poor. He even bullied those who could not fight back. The only thing that Abu Lahab loved was his wealth. Like the other elders, Abu Lahab also worshipped idols made of stone. He refused to serve Allah as the one and only true God. He used to say to himself, "If I become a Muslim, I would have to give some of my money to the poor and needy. This is what Allah says we should do. If I became a Muslim, I would have to be honest. I would not be free to make money by telling lies and cheating." After the elders had eaten, Muhammad, the blessed Prophet, rose to speak to them about Allah. Muhammad wanted to tell them that Allah was the only true God and that he was his Prophet. He also wanted to tell them to stop worshipping stone idols. No sooner had the blessed Prophet started to speak than Abu Lahab began to shout him down. Abu Lahab hated the blessed Prophet, even though he was his own nephew. He did not want the other guests to hear what Muhammad was going to say. He shouted so loudly that the blessed Prophet had to stop speaking. So all the guests went away without hearing what the blessed Prophet had to say about Allah. When the guests had gone, Ali was very upset. He was disappointed with Abu Lahab. He could not understand how one of his own family could behave so badly. The blessed Prophet saw how upset Ali was and said to him, "Do not give up hope. You will see. We shall win because Allah will help us. I want you to prepare another feast and invite the same guests. We shall see what happens this time." Ali did as the blessed Prophet asked him to do. All the elders of the family came to the feast. After they had eaten, the blessed Prophet again rose to speak to them about Allah. This time, Abu Lahab did not interrupt. "My friends," the blessed Prophet said, "I am here with a message from your Lord Allah, the one and only true God. He has chosen me as his prophet. He has sent me as his messenger to tell you how to live your life to attain success in this world and in the hereafter. Listen carefully to what Allah has told me to tell you. This is what he says. I am the only true God. Remember me always. Love me and worship me. Serve me and obey me. Bow down before me. If you do this, you will please me, and I shall make you a promise because I love and care for you. If you do exactly as I say, I shall reward you generously and deliver you from all evil. Have no fear, nor will you regret anything. This is what Allah has said to me. This is what he has told me to tell you. Now, my brothers, which of you will help me serve Allah? Who will be my follower? Who will be my companion in his great work?" No one said a word. Although all the elders heard what the blessed Prophet had said, no one came forward to help him. When the blessed Prophet looked at each of them in turn, they turned their faces away from him. Ali could not believe it. He knew in his heart that Muhammad had spoken the truth, but he could not understand why the elders did not believe him. They must be mad if they don't want Allah to guide them. Ali looked towards the blessed Prophet, who was standing, waiting for someone to offer to help him. Ali could bear the stony silence no longer. Quietly he got to his feet. Then he went right through the middle of the elders and stood by the blessed Prophet's side. "Prophet of Allah," he said, "I shall be your follower. I shall be your companion and helper. Although I am young and not very strong, I shall fight by your side. Your enemies will be my enemies." When the elders heard what Ali had to say, they did not know what to do. How could a boy help Muhammad fight his enemies? But Ali had faith in Allah. He knew that Allah would help him and the blessed Prophet. He knew that one day they would win. The blessed Prophet was delighted at what Ali had done. "Look," he said, "here is a boy who has more courage than all the men gathered here. I gladly welcome him as my follower and helper. You should all listen to him and follow him." Muhammad smiled at Ali. This was more than Abu Lahab could stand. He had been sitting there quietly laughing to himself, but when he heard the blessed Prophet praising Ali, he began to shout again and make a terrible noise. "Brothers," he said, "how can a man and a boy change the rest of the world? How can two persuade millions to follow them? It is not possible." But Abu Lahab was wrong. This is just what the blessed Prophet and Ali and others who followed the blessed Prophet did do, because Allah was with them.
Our fifth story is The Feat of Courage.
The Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, spent most of his life trying to get the people of Mecca to worship Allah alone. Every day he would go out into the city and tell them that Allah was the one and only true God. He would tell them that he was Allah's prophet. Some of the people believed what Muhammad had said and became Muslims. They worshipped Allah and trusted his prophet. But although Muhammad tried hard for many years, the people of Mecca who became Muslims were few in number. Most of the people of Mecca refused to believe the blessed Prophet. They were blinded by their own greed. They worshipped idols made of stone and hoped that these idols would make them rich and happy. The priests and leaders of the people also encouraged them to do this. They too were blinded by greed. They thought it right to make as much money as they could. They did not care how the money was made. The priests and leaders of the people refused to worship Allah as the one and only true God. Although the blessed Prophet Muhammad had only a few followers, they were strong in their faith. Some of the people began to take notice of them and talk about them. Perhaps there is something in what these Muslims are doing, they thought. Muhammad may be right. Perhaps we should give up worshipping idols made of stone and believe in Allah.
At the end of the tape,